afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The exciting saga continues. Night Divided. Could be. Could not be. Could be. Could not be. Could be. Our closing day. It is wonderful to see you today, ladies and gentlemen. Happy day to you. A beautiful Thursday afternoon in this glorious, glorious place we call Georgia, Atlanta. I don't know if you can hear. Can you hear the bird? That is a mockingbird. He sits right up there. He's right there. Wait, hold on. He's like right up there. Listen to him. It's a mockingbird. A mockingbird, ladies and gentlemen, does exactly what its name implies. It mocks all the other kinds of songs that other birds are able to make. This one, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is actually nesting right in that tree over there. That's why he's always around. He's either over on that wire or he's over on another wire in my neighborhood. And so I just wanted to kind of share a little bit more about where I live. But that mockingbird has been with us for a couple years. It's all one bird. I hope you can hear it. If you can't, look up mockingbird. We right now, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. O here for another exciting reading. If you'll notice, we have very little left. We have very little left. This is all that hath been read thus far. This is the remaining bits and pieces of a wonderful story entitled Night Divided. You may see somebody show up over here. Don't worry about them. That's our friend Jeremy, who's doing a little bit of work around the house. I have warned him that I might be in the middle of busy work, important, essential work. And so now, without further ado, we are 2 minutes into this story, and let's see how far we get today. Hopefully you've watched all the other videos. Hopefully that you have a piece of paper in front of you. I have realized that I have not been providing you an opportunity to share your work. I figured that out today. You are now capable of sharing your work down there in the comments section. Those of you who are becoming professional verbal to visuals, got to give huge props to Verbal to Visual because it's been one of the coolest opportunities for my kids in their comprehension and their listening skills to be able to create an illustrated textual example of what they're hearing in the story. So those of you who are pros at it, you know who you are. Share your work down below. Be respectful of comments. Otherwise, I have to turn off the comments. So from now until the end of when we are doing our readings, which is hopefully a very long time, it's time to start reading. Chapter 43, Night Divided. I repeat, Chapter 43, Night Divided. Now, the deal is that I've started seeing, now that I've opened up my time. Hello to those of you who are saying hello. It is good to see you. It's really nice to see you representing on the side, and that's super cool. But without further ado, my Gwyn Oaks Broncos, who I am not able to be together with, I'm reading this for you mostly, but anybody else who you want to have come along, if they're from any of the other classes, share and subscribe. Share and subscribe. Get involved. There are incredible stories to be read in this world, and we're going to do some of that ourselves. So without further ado, Chapter 43 of 47. There is no such thing as a little freedom. Either you are all free or you are not free. Walter Cronkite, American journalist, 1965. But the dude was like a journalist until like way, way, way closer to time that you were alive, if I'm not mistaken. Let's go. I stared at the clock over our stove, willing the hands to move faster than feeling frustrated because they didn't. Everything had been cleaned and packed up, so now there was nothing left but to wait and to think, and then to think about waiting. It was unbearable, and I didn't understand how Mama could sit so calmly on the couch and knit a blanket she knew full well would never be finished. I did have one particular thought that continued to nag at me. As silly as it might have been to care about something so trivial, I wished I had offered Anna the harvest from our garden. I looked back on all that she had done for me since we started on the tunnel. What I had thought was her cruel rejection of our friendship was only her way of creating distance between us, so that she wouldn't have to know anything I might be up to. Then, when the Stasi began putting more pressure on her and her family, she had warmed to me again. By my cold responses, she must have known that I was keeping secrets. But when she discovered them, and would have been entirely justified in revealing everything she knew, she had held back to protect me, risking herself and everyone she loved. Oh my gosh, so right. And in return, I couldn't even offer her family our harvest. But there was something I could do. I sat at the small desk in my room that afternoon and began to write a letter. Her name was at the very top, but the letter wasn't for her. It was for the Stasi, who would search my apartment tomorrow. It's in scribble letter. It's in scribbles. Look at that. It's kind of in scribble, different than the stuff up top. So this author and the printer decided to make that different. Thank you very much to everybody who was involved in that. Dear Anna, I'm writing this letter to apologize for my rude behavior over the last couple of months. You were brokenhearted when your brother tried to escape and never guessed he would try such a thing. But I wasn't there for you like I should have been. I wasn't the friend you deserved. What I couldn't tell you was that I came to understand why Peter left. You don't know, so I'm telling you now. Peter was right. We are not animals who can be corralled behind a cement wall. And although the state might listen to our words and watch our actions, they will never know my thoughts, which means that they will never truly control me. And if I am my own person, then it's time for me to leave this prison. Somewhere in his growing up, Peter saw the sun in the west and couldn't live through another dark night, nor will I. If you had known my plans, I know you would have tried to stop me. So please forgive me for keeping you in the dark. Your best friend, Gerda. I like this letter. I like how she's setting it up so that that Anna is not going to get blamed. I love the idea that she knows that it's important to keep Anna safe and her family safe, but also at the same time being able to protest how she's feeling about the East Berlin government and the Stasi. I read the letter over and over again, erasing parts that didn't seem quite right and replacing them with words that better communicated my feelings. Everything I wrote in there was true, except for the last couple of lines. Those were meant to protect Anna from any accusations of helping us escape. Then I left the letter on my desk, where it would easily be found tomorrow by the Stasi. Once I left my room, Mama had returned to cleaning. I suppose that kept her mind busy, but at the moment, she was polishing the brass knobs on an old rocker in the corner of the room. She was as anxious as I was. In the center of the room was a pile of things that she wanted to bring with us to the West. It was far more than she and I could carry together, and I knelt beside it to weed out what could be left behind. Mama let me do it without protesting. Maybe she figured that that would keep me busy as well. I didn't want any of my clothes, not one piece. They were bland and orderly, and represented a life I intended to leave all behind. Besides, I'd seen magazines and knew how girls my age were starting to dress in the West. Fritz wouldn't want his clothes either, and I promised myself that I would make Mama change her fashions too. It was for her own good. Kids often know a lot more about fashion than older people. Right, kids? You guys get it a lot more than I do usually. In the center of the pile was a box of china that had been passed down to my mother when she was married. It had been in her family for generations, which meant it had come through 2 world wars, the Allied bombings, the hunger winter of 1947, and somehow had even survived the tennis balls my brother swore they never tossed around our apartment while they were children. Mama loved those dishes, and so did I. They were supposed to come to me one day, but how would we ever carry them so far? I shook my head at her and pushed the box aside. Mama must have known I was right, because her only protest was a weak sigh and passing frown. She knelt down and wrote on a piece of paper, "For Frau Eberhardt, I forgive you." They're going to give Frau Eberhardt the fancy china that should have been passed down from family to family. Connection. Sorry, have to connect. Something that's passed down from generation to generation, an heirloom. Heirloom. Those of you who might recall a little shamrock that I happened to pass on to a young lady by the name of Erin O'Leary in my last-ditch effort to prove my love to her, that she then threw away, causing a massive curse in my family by the leprechaun, and keeping our family in warnings. I'm wondering at this point now that we're talking about that, we must check in and find out whether or not the leprechaun had anything to do with COVID-19. I'm telling you, it would be his greatest trick yet. I told you, he's there to stump us, but never to kill us. So let's keep strong that we have no problems beyond just being kept apart. Okay, anyway, sorry. I'm sorry, I was reading. Jeez, relax. Gosh, get off my back. I'm on my way. Idiom. Where was I? Oh, here we are. For Frau Eberhardt, I forgive you. I set her note on top of the box more gently than Frau Eberhardt deserved. If my mother was trying to teach me a lesson, then the point of it escaped me. I hope to understand forgiveness better one day. Her mom is definitely showing much more forgiveness than I think Gerda or any of us who are listening to this story are there. Moving my attention back to the pile, I found my old stuffed bear near the bottom. One eye was missing and the stitching had come loose along his back, but I never cared that he wasn't perfect. For weeks after the barbed wire fence went up and Papa and Dominic didn't come home, I wrapped this bear in my arms every night and cried into its fur. It had comforted me then, but within a few hours, I would have my father back again. I didn't need the bear anymore. So making a decision to leave behind something that was so important before. Mama also had her Bible in the stack. I shook my head and started to move it aside, but Mama pulled it back, insisting it must come with us. I took another piece of paper and on it wrote, "For the Stasi, who need it more than we do." I like Gerda. Then I set it on the Bible and handed it over to her. She read the note, silently mouthed words I couldn't read, and then set the Bible aside. As part of her insistence that we leave everything cleaner than the day it was new, Mama suggested we put away the items that couldn't come with us. Afterward, we shared a small supper together. I wished there was more, but told myself I could have as big a supper as I wanted tomorrow. We didn't say much to each other. Our hearts and minds had already flown to the tunnel, so nothing was left to talk about here. Once we were all cleaned up, Mama announced that it was time to go and meet Fritz, to take him to the military station. I literally dropped everything and dove into a sweater to leave. After so many long days of back-aching work, our time had finally come. But even as we reached for the knob to leave, a knock came at our door. Mama quickly motioned for me to remove my sweater and clear everything from the front room that might look suspicious. Maybe it was only a neighbor coming to borrow an egg, or something equally innocent, but even the simplest visitor could present a major problem. We had only a few sacks, mostly old photos and family records and a personal treasure for each person in the family, but I grabbed them and stuffed everything into an empty cupboard in the kitchen. Then she answered the door. Frau Loh, guten Abend, a man's voice said. May we come in? The door was just wide enough for me to see who it was on the other side. When I did, my breath caught in my throat. This was no visiting neighbor. The Grenzers had come for us at last. Chapter 44. Many kiss the hand they wish to cut off. German proverb. Many kiss the hand they wish to cut off. Mother, early on, what did she do often whenever somebody who she didn't like came around? Do you remember? I do. Mama stood at the door, wedging a foot behind it to prevent them from pushing past her. It was a nice idea, though I knew it'd do little good if they truly wanted to get inside. How can I help you? Her tone was just as it ought to have been. Polite, firm, innocent. We just got word that your son Fritz has failed to report for military service today. I tilted my head, curious about why they came before the day was over. Surely other boys had also failed to report in. Why did they take all this trouble to check on Fritz? Then I answered my own question. Fritz's file. The GDR already considered Fritz a potential enemy to the state. Above nearly anyone else, they would make sure Fritz was in their custody. He still intends to go, Mama said. In fact, my daughter and I were going to join him on his way very soon. Where is he? The officer asked. Perhaps we can bring him to meet you. Mama hesitated. I could see her mind working for the exact words that might technically allow her to avoid telling a lie. I rarely went to so much effort. He can't be far away right now. His things are here, so I know we'll see him soon. Of course. He said that as if he didn't believe her. Well, Frau Loh, we will wait outside the apartment for him to come. As you said, I'm sure we'll see him soon. Mama nodded, then shut and locked the door behind him. She didn't need to tell me what to do next. As quietly as possible, we raced through the apartment, destroying anything that made it look as if we were packing to leave. I tousled my bed. Mama put dishes in the sink, and we put away anything that had been left out as intended gifts or to take with us. The notes on the china and the Bible were ripped up and flushed down the toilet. So was my note to clear Anna of any suspicion. That left an ache inside me, but I promised myself to find a way to help her once I was on the other side. If I reached the other side. None of that was certain now. From the front room window, we could see onto the street where two Grenzers' cars were waiting, almost acting as barricades to our building. Curfew began in less than an hour. Afterward, getting to the tunnel would be very difficult, if not impossible. Worse still, I knew it wouldn't be long before the Grenzers would demand answers for where Fritz was, and what could we possibly say when their questions came. Mama said things for the microphones about how Fritz would be back soon and about how silly the officers would feel for ever wondering about him. But fear clutched at my throat like a noose, and I could barely answer. It seemed senseless now to even pretend. With every tick of the clock, the Grenzers would become increasingly convinced that Fritz wasn't going to show up, which would lead them to one of two conclusions. Either he was escaping the country on his own, or else we were helping him hide somewhere. Whatever they decide, the Stasi would be here soon with questions we absolutely could not answer, no matter how they threatened us. Or worse, if we talked, it would cost Fritz's life and Papa's and Dominic's, even Officer Mueller and his family, if they showed up. When I looked, there didn't appear to be any officers out the back window. Maybe we could use a rope or something to lower ourselves down, but it would take us past the windows of apartments below ours, and someone was bound to see and report us. Besides, we had no rope here, and the sheets we might have tied together for an escape were hanging from a clothesline down at the Welcome Building. Mama cheerfully suggested that we might go for a walk, offering the microphones an excuse that we'd find Fritz ourselves, but we both dismissed that idea without further conversation. The Grenzers wouldn't just let us walk away, and even if they did, we'd certainly be followed. One more thought finally came to my mind, something so awful it made my toes curl inside my shoes, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. Expecting that Mama and I would arrive soon, Fritz and Papa would open that tunnel tonight. They would wait as long as possible for us to come, hoping for the best and silently wondering if the worst might have happened. At some point, it would become obvious that we were not coming. They would see the instability of the tunnel, discuss the Grenzers' investigation directly overhead, and conclude the only logical thing that they could. Tonight was our last chance. Fritz would be forced to cross into the West without us. By morning, Mama and I would be in a Stasi prison. The thought of that terrified me even more, but I had always known things might end this way, and I had to be strong, or at least pretend that I was for Mama's sake, since she looked as afraid as I was. She'd probably been thinking the same thing, though neither of us could freely discuss it here. Another knock came to the door, and Mama went to answer it. This time the Grenzers didn't wait for our curtsies before they barged in to search our home. There was nothing to find. Mama and I had made sure of that. And in full view, we had left Fritz's bags packed for the military, hoping it would look like it was still his plan. They were thorough in their search, looking in closets, under beds, and behind doors, even in places where no human body could even fit. When they began opening drawers and rifling through papers, I realized that they were looking for more than just Fritz. They wanted grounds for arrest, his arrest, and ours. For the first time, I was grateful that Mama had made us clean so thoroughly. Nothing in our apartment led to the tunnel or to any sign of us planning an escape. We stood in the center of the front room, Mama and me holding hands. My clutch on her was fierce, but she whispered that we must remain calm. Finally, one officer approached us. I recognized him as Victor, Fritz's old friend. Oh my gosh, he's coming back right now. I recognized him as Victor, Fritz's old friend. If Victor remembered me, he gave no sign of it. Victor was with the Stasi. I remembered that all too well. Our apologies for any inconvenience to you and your daughter, Victor said. You understand that at this point, it is clear that your son is not planning to report tonight. I can't give you any explanation, Mama said. Nor am I asking for one, Victor replied. But if he is not here by curfew, we will bring you and your daughter in for a conversation with my superiors. They will demand an explanation, and you will provide one to them. The way he ended his sentence turned my stomach into knots. Mama couldn't say a word in response, and I only gripped her hand tighter. Victor frowned down at me. You and your brother are very close, no? Where do you think he is? I shrugged lamely. From his expression, he obviously knew that I was holding something back, something big, but he wasn't authorized to pry those secrets from me. That was for the interrogators to do, and they could pry, they would pry, or dig, or tear those secrets from me using methods I couldn't begin to think about without feeling sick. I wouldn't pretend to be strong enough to resist them. I only hoped I could hold out long enough for Fritz to get away. Chapter 45. They do not have the courage to say it was a wall of disgrace. Helmut Kohl, Chancellor of West Germany, when the wall finally came down, 1991. Once they had determined that Fritz wasn't here, the other officers said that they would conduct a search of every apartment in this building, in case Fritz had gone into one of the others to hide. Victor was ordered to wait here with us. Mama released my hand and casually went into the kitchen to prepare some tea. Why would she care about that with everything else happening? I couldn't even think straight, and she wanted a cup of tea? But my mother surprised me again, because when the tea was ready, she offered it to Victor. Thank you, Frau Loh, but no, he said. Mama insisted. You must be thirsty from such a long evening, and it's my family's fault that you've been so inconvenienced. It's only some tea. I'd known for a very long time that when my mother wanted her way, it was impossible to refuse her. Now Victor understood that too. After she held out the tea long enough, he slung his rifle over his shoulder, then took the teacup. As if this had suddenly become a social visit, Mama sat down on our couch and patted the cushion for me. She gestured for Victor to sit as well, but he would not. It didn't seem to matter to her. I remember when you were no taller than my knee. Mama said to him. You and Fritz were in nursery school together so long ago, and have remained friends since, I believe. We were friends as children, yes, Victor said stiffly. But look at you now, so strong, so grown up. You're young to have so much responsibility. I'm just a junior officer, Victor said. But perhaps in time I will earn my way up. I'm sure you will. Mama stood again. But part of becoming a man is knowing what's important in life. Would you agree? Victor stiffened his spine. I know it's important. Your son would do well to learn the same things. Absolutely. Things like family are what matter most. You have family too, Victor. You have a mother. If you were in trouble, how far would your mother go to help you? Do you believe? Victor faced forward without answering, but I knew he was listening. Mama took my hand and brought me to my feet. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the keys to the Trabant from Oma Gertrude, then left them on the kitchen table. He eyed the keys and looked away again, but he understood what was happening as well as I did. Trabant cars weren't grand in any way, but even the most run-down car often took months to find. A new Trabant might take a decade or more, if someone as young as Victor could even afford a Trabant. Victor and my mother were locked in a stare, and I wondered if they were coming to a sort of unspoken agreement. I didn't know, I couldn't tell. I had trouble looking at anything but the gun over his shoulder and thinking about anything other than the way he dumped Herr Kraus on the sidewalk not so many days ago. Victor belonged to the state. His friendship with Fritz meant nothing to him, and we mattered even less. Though he continued staring at Mama, his hand slid to the stock of his gun. He didn't need to shoot. All he had to do was call in the other officers, and they would do it for him. Finally, Mama raised all 10 of her fingers and nodded at him, but he didn't respond. Then she started backing us toward the door, one small step at a time. How far would he let us go before he grabbed the trigger? Or were the 10 fingers part of their silent agreement? I squeezed Mama's hand like I'd never held on to anything before. What if she was wrong? Finally, Victor stole a glance at the Trabant keys, and then I knew we had him. Bribery was a form of currency in the GDR, and we finally had something valuable enough to offer. He looked forward again and said, I hear a sound in the back room. Don't either of you go anywhere while I check it out. He grabbed for the keys and then started to walk toward Fritz's room. As soon as he was gone, Mama opened our door. There was a back exit in the case of a fire, and Mama and I took that way down as silent as the metal stairs would allow. To me, our footsteps sounded like booming echoes, forcing both of us to our tiptoes to dull the noise. I didn't dare ask Mama about her 10 fingers, not even in a whisper. If it was a signal for time, then that 10 minutes, or was that 10 minutes? Or did we only have 10 seconds? I didn't know and only hurried faster. Once we reached the main floor, we inched the back door open, leading us into a dark alley so quietly that it sent shivers up my spine. I expected someone to be waiting here, Mama whispered. Sorry, I expected someone to be waiting here, Mama whispered, which made me wonder what her plan had been, if there was. If we're out of money, had given up the only valuable thing we still owned, and carried nothing with us but the clothes on our backs, I only answered, there aren't enough officers for every exit of this building. This is God's hand at work, helping us, Mama said, clutching my hand to leave. Say a prayer of thanks as we walk. I intended to obey her, but only after we were safe, and that wasn't yet. We were barely out of the alley when whistles blew from the inside our building. Our absence had been discovered. This time, I took the lead. Over the past few weeks, to avoid Frau Eberhardt and any other curious eyes, I had found every possible back route to the Welcome Building. I knew where to go now. We heard Grenzer's sirens on the main roads searching for us, but we didn't need the main roads to get there. At least, not until our last dash into the alley. The problem was that curfew had already begun. Nobody should have been on the streets, so if the officer saw anyone at all, it would be us. We went as carefully as spies, through dark back alleys, walkways too narrow to be used as roads, and even through unlocked doors of other people's apartment buildings. The final crossing into the alley was our most difficult. With a long run from one hiding place to another, I wanted to split up, so that if I didn't make it, perhaps Mother would. Perhaps she would have a chance, but she only grabbed my hand and pushed me into the street as she hurried along at my side. I saw a woman in the window of an apartment overhead reading a book. When we were in the center of the street, she looked down right at us. I froze for a fraction of a moment, wondering what she might do. But she only pulled the shade for her window and then switched off the light. I thought of the proverb, to see no evil, and hoped it would follow with the woman also refusing to speak no evil. Before I knew it, we were inside the alley. That woman had all the power, and now she let them go. From there, we ran until my garden came into view just ahead. How beautiful it seemed to me then, how deadly. The irrigation ditch that bordered the garden patch would get in our way, slowing us, but I hoped it wouldn't have much water this late at night. You have to jump the ditch, I explained to Mama, and we collected a stack of rocks to the right of it, so just follow me exactly where I go. Her hand pressed against my back. Whatever happens, you keep running, Gerta. Keep running and don't look back for me. Then she pushed me forward. There was nothing more to say. We ran. What if I stopped right now? I'm just kidding. Okay, by now, I knew the land so well I could have run it with my eyes closed. And on this dark night, I might as well have done just that. The ditch was narrowest to my left, and I took that way. I jumped it easily, but Mama missed the bank and splashed in with one foot that became lodged in the mud. No matter what she had said, nothing would make me leave her behind. So I came back and grabbed her hand and helped her back onto the hard ground. We continued running, and suddenly lights blazed on the watchtower ahead of us. Mama and I dropped to the earth like falling timbers. Even without being aimed our way, the lights still brightened the garden considerably, casting everything in long shadows. They swooped up and down the death strip in their usual path and then began to turn our way. I knew this routine. I'd seen it before. Along the other areas east of the wall, the lights would survey this garden patch next. We'd be spotted and our position called out to the Grenzers, still searching for us on the streets. We had less than a minute to get all the way to the building. We ran so fast that my lungs ached and my head pounded. Rocks had gathered in my shoes, but I barely felt them. We dove against the bricks while the watchtower light swept down onto our field. It stayed there for such a long time, highlighting the shovel I had placed in the dirt earlier that day. That shovel was our monument to freedom, even if nobody else knew it. We weren't there to see where the light went after that, for we had already climbed inside the welcome building and shut the boards tight behind us. Mama leaned against the wall to catch her breath, but I whispered, "No, Mama, please, we're not there yet." She nodded at me and followed. Fritz was waiting for us down in the shelter and looked so relieved that I thought he might almost deflate right in front of us. "What took so long?" he asked. Mama's response was simple. "We had some trouble." Trouble? He looked at us, with red faces and sweat along our foreheads. "Are you both all right?" It isn't yet. I only beamed back at him. "We are, if that tunnel is open." "It isn't yet," he said. "Papa wanted to give the bricks as long as possible to dry, and so we haven't removed the final load of dirt yet. He figured once we did, even with our fortifications, it's only a matter of moments before it collapses." "Then let's get in and remove it," Mama said. "Officer Mueller?" I asked. "He's already in the tunnel with his wife and his baby," he said. When his wife heard about the plan, she insisted they go. They got here an hour ago. They've been waiting for us. We followed Fritz inside. A woman I assumed must be Frau Mueller was seated on the ground with a young baby in her arms who, at least so far, was asleep. She smiled up at me, and I thought she was a rather pretty woman. Officer Mueller stood over them, in full uniform and armed. He greeted me with a solemn nod that seemed more respectful than in our first meeting. I nodded back, but said nothing. It bothered me that he had his gun, because we certainly weren't safe yet, and I remembered his promise if we were caught. Still, when he saw that we had come, he walked over to Fritz and whispered, "We waited for them, as you asked. The tunnels must be connected immediately," Mama said. "It won't take the Grenzers long to figure out where Gerda and I have gone." "Katerina?" My father's relieved voice called from the other side. "You finally come." "We're here," she said, "though I wouldn't have made it without Gerda's help." "I expected nothing less from my daughter," Papa said. "Let's open the tunnel, but dig carefully. I don't like the cracks I'm starting to see on this side." I bought you some time, Officer Mueller said. My last call into the Central Command tonight was to tell them that I checked this area out and nobody was here. But it won't work for long. When they can't find you on the streets, the senior officers will bring out their dogs, who will follow your trail here. If only we had some rain, Mama said. That would erase our trail and mask any noise of us clearing this barrier. Or it could make the ground so wet that we flood, Or it could make the ground so wet that we could flood, Fritz reminded her. Enough talk, I said. Let's dig. Mueller and Fritz went to work at our end, and from the other side I heard Papa and Dominic chiseling away at the dirt and rock. We decided to dig low to maintain as much dirt over our heads as possible. We would have to crouch down to pass through this space, or even crawl, but if necessary, I would have squeezed through the eye of a needle. All I wanted was to be on the other side of this wall, as soon and as possible as we could. The rabbit-sized hole widened. I could see Papa's boots from here, the same sturdy boots he had worn the night he left, only now with a hole in one side. With another chip, I saw the cuff of his pants, and I begged them to go faster. It was torture to have my father revealed to me 1 centimeter at a time. The dirt was beginning to pile up around Fritz and Mueller, so I offered to go back to the shelter for the bucket and remove what I could. I planned to empty all the spare dirt into a large pile at the entrance to slow the Grenzers if they came. But I was only halfway there before I heard noises above us, in the basement of the Welcome Building. It wasn't voices, or at least none I could detect from here, but there were footsteps, several of them. I ran back into the tunnel. Someone's here, I hissed. We must go now. The gap had opened enough that I could fit through, and maybe Frau Mueller, but none of the rest could. And there was a jagged rock jutting out from the center that would probably keep us from getting all the way through. They had been working to gently pry it free. There was no time left to be gentle. It had to be now. I'd rather have had the tunnel collapse than be arrested or shot. Officer Mueller withdrew his gun and ran back down the tunnel. I wasn't sure what to do. Did he plan on shooting whoever had come, or shooting us? Then he said, I'll hold off whoever's there as long as I can. He looked over to Fritz. Get my wife and baby out first. You owe that to me. If Mueller intended to protect us, he needed help. With everyone else busy, I grabbed a couple of rocks from the tunnel floor. If someone got past Mueller, I could throw hard enough to slow him down until the others finally escaped. Mueller shouted out a warning that he was armed and for whoever was approaching to stop. Then a voice called, Where's Gerda? Is she here? That was Anna. I dropped the rocks and ran past Mueller to the mouth of the tunnel. Lower your gun, I hissed at him. Don't shoot. Anna was waiting in the shelter with her mother while her father finished climbing down the ladder. Seeing my curiosity, she only shrugged and said, You asked me to figure out why Peter wanted to leave. Well, we did. Anna's father nodded at us in return, but said, Then let's go now. I'm afraid we were noticed being out after curfew and may have put some officers on our trail. They're not far from behind us. Flashlights were already showing in the garden patch. It wouldn't take the Grenzers long to follow us inside. They were coming. Chapters. Oh my gosh, chapter 46. No. We wait. 3 chapters a day. We wait, just like some of you all year long did only but read 3 chapters a day. You are so angry at me. You are so frustrated, and I kind of like it. Come back tomorrow. Be with us. I want to see examples of what you have written as a verbal to visual. The sun has moved. It is time to play. I pray that everybody is done with their work. Your children, your spirits, it's springtime. It's time to be outside and enjoy your afternoon. But before we go, wash your hands. Stay away for right now. Wish to be together. And come back tomorrow, 3:30. We conclude. I love you. Now get out of here.